And welcome, Raj Patel, to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We're so glad to have you here. Raj, I'm so honored to have you here. You need to know about Raj. He's the co-director, co-producer of the Ants and the Grasshopper, which will be at the One Earth Film Festival, which runs from the 3rd to the 14th of March. It's mostly online, as I said before. You can participate in some local screenings and the opening on the 4th. It is the kickoff.
Mm-hmm.
But Raj is a James Beard award-winning activist and New York Times best-selling writer. He's testified about food and hunger to the United States, the UK, and EU governments. And his book on the food system, Stuffed and Starved, has been translated into a dozen languages. You're also the author of The Value of Nothing and Seven Cheap Things in 3 minutes, 45 seconds. One of the best titles ever. But as I wrote on my blog, and folks can go to mikenovak.net to see this, I think the thing that impresses me most about you is that you've been tear gassed on 4 continents protesting the World Bank and the WTO. So it's like a friend of mine, well, my partner, Kathleen, she wrote a book that was banned in South Africa. And she always had that on her resume. Now, this was during apartheid. And that was one of the things she was always proudest of. And that says something. If you're being banned, it means you're making noise, and you're scaring people. And that's a good thing. And it's not like the banning books here in the United States right now. Now that's a different thing. And I don't know if you noticed, Peggy, but I've got my new. If you look in the lower right corner there, it'll
Mm-hmm.
pop up at some point. We've got a new slogan about reading banned books. So,
And
Yes.
I was also going to point out in your newest book, which I see behind you, Inflamed.
Yes. That's right. Thank you, Peggy.
and tell us about that. What's inflamed?
Inflamed, in short, you will have noticed that you or people that you love are increasingly being diagnosed with inflammatory diseases, whether that's sort of irritable bowel syndrome or anything from sort of Alzheimer's to certain kinds of cancers are inflammatory diseases. And what I and my colleague, Dr. Rupa Maria, do is explain why it is that we're seeing this sort of huge bout of inflammatory disease, not just through COVID, but even before COVID, there's a vast increase in inflammatory disease. But we're linking that to the fact that not only is your body inflamed, but our communities are inflamed and our planet is on fire too. And the reason that all 3 of these things is happening, your body, the planet, and our communities, has everything to do with the history of the world, really for the past 600 years. So we trace out how it is that this inflammatory disease is spreading, but also offer some ideas about how to fix it that aren't just about, eating differently or putting an app on your phone to stop yourself seeing blue light at night, but actually engaging in community activism to actually change the world.
Which brings me to a question I have to ask you is, given your activism and the things you've participated in and the books you've written, would you consider yourself an optimist or a pessimist about the world right now?
Well, there's a famous phrase about being an optimist of the intellect and a pessimist of the will. A pessimist of the intellect and an optimist of the will. So what that means is, look, you look at the world around you, and you've got to think, well, things are looking pretty bad. We were reducing our carbon emissions through the pandemic, but now things are just way back up like they used to be. Species kind of came back onto the street, but now we're running them over like it's business as usual. The 6th extinction is going on, and every intellectual bit of data suggests that we're still heading to hell in a handbasket. But you have to have an optimist of the, to be an optimist of the will. You need to be optimistic because otherwise all hope is lost. And hope isn't just the sort of thing that you cross your fingers or you put it on a T-shirt and hope that your elected official will deliver it. Hope is what you do to make the world better. And I do see a lot more people engaging in activism for change, and that's practical optimism. So I think it's all right to be both, Mike and Peggy. I mean, you can't be self-delusional about the world we're in, but you can't be, you can't despair either.
Well, you don't make films like the one you did if you're a pessimist, especially since it took you 10 years, and that's
Wow.
just an insane length of time to do. I hate to tell you this, Raj, but Charlie Chaplin was cranking them out one a week. And
I, but we were following not in the footsteps of Charlie Chaplin, but in those of one of the great sons of Chicago. Steve James, some of y'all may know as the director of that great Chicago film Hoop Dreams, and Hoop Dreams took 5 years to make. And Steve was, telling this amazing story of young black men in Chicago and the NBA, and it took him a very long time to put it together. So 10 years doesn't seem too long, particularly since he was there at the beginning and he set us on our path. And then the reason it took 10 years was because we started off telling one kind of story, and we had 3 or 4 years worth of footage from Malawi, a small country in southern Africa. But then it turned out that our lead character decided that she wanted to get behind the scenes of climate change. She wanted to know why, despite everything that she was doing in Malawi, in her village, to fight climate change, actually the big problems were stemming from here, from the United States. She wanted to come here. And so we figured out a way for her to visit, and then we figured out what the impact of her visit was over the next couple of years. So that's a 10-year project right there.
Right.
And one of the things you say about the film that it is so remarkable, you say it's a meditation on change in Malawi, in the United States, in a household far away, on a farm nearby, and you go to American farms and you talk to folks there. We'll get into that in a second.
Yeah, and I have a couple questions on that too. So
Oh, I have lots of questions about that. It's a 10-year documentary project launched from the recognition that to defeat climate change, we'll need big transformative change. And I don't think people understand the kind of transformative change that is really needed. They, especially in America, we on our day-to-day lives, we tweak and we dabble, nip around the edges, and don't understand that that's not going to get the job done. But you again say we asked whether such change is possible and what it would look like. We found answers to both, and more than that, we were changed in the making of this film because the film itself evolved as you went on through 10 years, didn't it?
and you had to take it past COVID.
That's right, Peggy. I mean, the film originally was going to be a story about how change happens in Malawi. The reason it would be an important story to tell is because most people think, oh, Africa, that's where the hunger is. They have no idea. We must send whatever food aid or technology or whatever it is over there, and that'll help them. But the story that we needed to tell was showing how to end hunger, a group of farmers and activists and teachers in Malawi have ended hunger in some villages, particularly child malnutrition, by growing plants differently, using agroecology, which is a term we heard a little earlier on, but not just using agroecology to grow things, but also using it to make sure that work is distributed equally in the home. One of the reasons that there is child malnutrition sometimes is because men aren't doing enough, and they're taking too much food and making women not only farm and carry water, but also look after the kids and do a whole bunch of other things. And in the end, child malnutrition flourishes because of gender inequality. And so, this film was just going to be a story about how actually some brilliant ideas about ending hunger in Africa are coming from Africa, and it involves not just planting new things, but also ending patriarchy. For us men to realize that we got to do our fair share. Now, that's a fantastic idea in and of itself. It's brilliant. We should, it would be great to have some of that over here in America. But then, one of the things that was going to happen initially was we were going to have a narrator, right? So someone in the scratch track in the original version, it was me doing my sort of David Attenborough thing, where it's like, and here we are in Malawi, and if you listen very carefully, you can hear the Malawians doing their thing. It's very exciting. Dave, but that's obviously wrong, because the story is about folk in Malawi actually being much more powerful than anyone ever gave them credit for. And to repeat the sort of cinematic mistake of saying, well, and here we are, and here's something completely different, would be to compound that error. And so in the end, this film involved getting rid of me and getting rid of all these, the voices that normally intercede and trying to interpret for you what's going on, and let the voice of our key character, Anita Chitaya, take over that story.
That
So
is,
that was
I love your impersonation of Attenborough. That's just delightful. Do you do any others? Would like to see them.
you can try and get me doing James Bond, and after that, it's all downhill. I'm afraid.
But you're right. You could call it, as I'm watching, I'm saying to myself, this is a feminist film. It's a social justice film. But I guess you could say that about any film that's about environmentalism is a social justice film, because it affects us all. And that it always raises that question, is that if we don't change now, when are we going to change? How are we going to change? Can we change? And the fact that you changed yourself and your approach to this film is remarkable, and it turned it from this vision you had at the outset to something completely different, as you say, and now for something completely different. So let's talk about I know, Peggy, you want to, well, I'll let you jump in, Peggy, because we have questions about the part of the film where Anita comes to America and talks to farmers, and to mostly farmers.
Yeah. And the people who are working on their farms.
Right, exactly. Did you have a specific question, Peggy?
Well, one of my questions, I was just curious as I was watching it, because the farms were primarily Wisconsin, Iowa, how the selection process, how you chose what farms to bring her to.
So what Anita wanted was to come to America and persuade all Americans that climate change was real, and that that we can and should be doing a little bit more than carrying canvas bags and drinking out of metal straws and driving Teslas. So she, her vision was, she wanted to speak to anyone and everyone who would speak to her, and that was the problem, because we tried to get interviews with senior government officials, with the big foundations that invest in agriculture, with any of the big companies, any big farms in the United States. None of them would speak to us. None of the food corporations would speak to us. No one would speak to us.
Well, can I stop you there for a second? Why? I mean, it seems to me that they could take 10 minutes out of their day and pat you guys on the head, and then they would look good because they can say, yes, we talked to the folks in this documentary. Why would they not even give you the time of day?
I mean, a couple of reasons. One, I am, as you mentioned in the introduction, something of a troublemaker, and it doesn't take much to realize that they would be in a difficult conversation, because I would be asking questions about, well, you say this in your corporate rhetoric, but actually it turns out X, Y, and Z in your corporate action. And one could say that about any government agency or any large corporation, and they know that. I mean, that's never the sort of thing you walk into as a corporation, knowing that you are going to be smacked upside the head with the truth. And so that's they were wary. But then Anita has a theory of change. She says it in the film. What she says is, if you go to someone's doorstep with your problem, they cannot ignore you. And that's right, I think. Her method of change is to go to people's houses and sit down and talk and share ideas, and in the end, engage in transformative conversation and transformative work. And the way that these companies and government officials wanted to avoid that was by not inviting her to their doorstep. So they know that this approach works, and they would rather keep things as they are.
Wow.
So you end up going to these farms. Some are small, some are not so small, and you talk to the folks there. I have to say it was a little bit disturbing to me that even the organic farmers would look at you and say, well, there's really nothing well, first of all, we're not even sure there's climate change, and there's really nothing we can do about it. And to do something, it means we'd have to change our lives. And they look very serious and very concerned that it would be difficult because we have to change our lives. On the other hand, somebody did take a different course in after talking to you, the fellow who ends up raising the organic chicken. So it's
Yeah,
you
and,
you
and and that's kind of its own thing because it's a disconnect. The guy with the organic farm thinks everybody who works with him obviously is on the same page and learns they're
Well, so
not.
yeah, it was surprising for everyone that in fact, even in the organic world, there are different strains of why you do organic, and I think this speaks to a very American moment here. You mentioned earlier on, Peggy, we had to get this film through the pandemic, and in Malawi, when the pandemic happened, I think the death toll in a country of 17 million people. Initially, it was like 17 people. I mean, it was very small because everyone was sequestering themselves and doing. They were taking care of one another by obeying some basic public health laws. And of course, the rest of the world looks at the United States and looks at our death rate and is aghast that we won't do things for other people and we're only thinking about ourselves. Now, that matters in the organic world because some people eat organic food not because it destroys the environment, not because farm workers who are the most exposed to these toxins will suffer the consequences not just in their bodies but for generations through their families. That's not the reason they do it. The reason they do organic food is because their body is a temple. And that what we must put in our bodies is pure. And so the origins of thinking about organic food is not woven into our duties to other people or other beings, as it is in other countries. But here in America, our approach to organic food is very selfish. And that selfishness is something that I think, when Anita comes from Malawi, and when, frankly, anyone comes to the United States from almost anywhere else in the world, they're sort of boggled by. That we might end up doing the right things, but for such toxic reasons that when some moment of crisis comes like COVID, all of a sudden that selfishness is laid bare. And so, even among lefty sort of organic types here, we've had raging debates about vaccines when everywhere else in the world, the organic community understands, this is what you do to take care of other people. Whereas here, the suspicion of big ag and big chemistry is so vast that we forget our duties to one another. And I think that's the big story here, in thinking about the ants and the grasshopper. The title of the film is not the Aesop's fable, Ants and the Grasshopper, where the ants are working away and the grasshopper is lazily sitting around. In Malawi, the ants and the grasshopper refers to this thing where if there is a dead grasshopper, one ant can't lift it up and take it back to the ant net. But so many ants together can. And in America, as Anita observes, there are so many ants, but we're not lifting the grasshopper. And she's wondering why.
Me too. I think there's a lot of us who are wondering why, and you've brought into stark relief the issue that we have in this country, the whole America First idea, and I've known for a long time, and Peggy and I both understand this, that we're just part of a grander scheme. We're part of the world. And if we don't recognize that, we'll all go down together. The ship will sink and everyone will go down if the richest country in the world cannot figure out. The richest country in the history of the world cannot figure out how to solve, well, how to reach out to other people. And there's something wonderful. By the way, you've already started to make people think. I'm looking at our chat here, and Deb says, childhood malnutrition as a result of gender inequality. Fascinating. And yeah, and you do illustrate that in your film.
And I know we're talking the film and One Earth Film Festival, but I hope to ask you as well about Generation Food Project and how it all ties together.
Sure. What so many things, but the idea of this particular film, it was going to be one among many where we were showing that around the world there are communities right now that are doing the organizing and doing the work to transform the way that we eat in ways that are that crack open our imaginations. So, for example, the gender inequality story is actually, it plays out here in America. If you look at which group of Americans is most likely to be food insecure, it's female-headed households, single moms. And that's because of the way that we structure our society. We don't particularly care about single moms in this country, not
Yeah.
in the ways that we do about sort of billionaires, for instance. And so that that story is one that we wanted to sort of weave through this bigger project. But we've got lots of other stories about land reform. We've got stories about indigenous folk in Peru who are bringing seeds back home, and through COVID we'll have lots of other stories as well. So watch this space for more. It may take another 10 years before you see the next film, but it'll be worth it.
I have a feeling I'm not going to be able to live that down, Brenda. It's okay. I'm not going to compare you to Charlie Chaplin anymore. That is not going to happen. One of our viewers just wrote, here's a quote from David Mitchell. In an individual, selfishness uglifies the soul. For the human species, selfishness is extinction.
I think that's right, and that's there's a very useful phrase from Southern Africa called Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is the idea that I am because you are, and it's just a recognition that we only exist because of one another. The sort of Ayn Rand fable of self-made men is again, everywhere else in the world thinks Ayn Rand is some sort of dystopian nightmare, and here she is held in high regard.
Well, among some people. Among some people.
Indeed.
All right. Well, before we let you go, though, we should once again mention the One Earth Film Festival coming up here in Chicago, mainly online, as we said. And the way you find out about it is go to oneearthfilmfest.org. We've shown trailers from some of the remarkable films on the show. We're going to show a few more before in the next couple of weeks. Obviously,
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, what were you going to say?
So the Ants and the Grasshopper is on March 9th, both virtual and live at Chicago Public Library's Austin branch.
Right. And some of the other films are The Regeneration, Bring Your Own Brigade. We've seen the trailer for that about fires. The world, as you mentioned earlier, Raj, is burning up. The sooner we recognize that, and the sixth mass extinction, as you're talking about, the next thing we're going to talk about on this show is a tower that's a glass tower, 14 stories, being put up in a Chicago suburb that is going to next to a forest preserve that is going to be a bird magnet. And yes, and I see your expression. It's insanity itself, and we don't understand that in the middle of the sixth mass extinction, we cannot be that careless or that cynical. And yet we are. Anyway, back to the films. There's Exposure about a trip by women to the polar regions. Extinction, the facts, speaking of extinction. Girls for Future. We showed on this program, they call it here Octopus Making Contact, but it was called My Octopus Teacher when we ran the trailer. I'm not sure which is the real one, but Understory, A Journey Through the Tongass in Alaska. One of the great natural places left on the planet that, if some people had their way, would be cut down tomorrow, and without regard to what the consequences would be. All right, one of the things I have to tell you, Raj, is that we've already had one person say that, Raj, my favorite guest you've had on your show. All right. I'm feeling that way too. I'm going to ask a favor. Could we bring you back to talk about these issues in the future?
Well, I'd love to. I'd be honored.
No, we would be honored, but you have a lot to contribute, and I might make you do your Sean Connery again. And
It'd be a pleasure for you. I think I could do that. Actually.
We have a viewer who says, "Mr. Patel, you would be an amazing James Bond."
But I urge people to watch to go to the One Earth Film Festival. And by the way, the films are free, but there is a suggested donation. Come on, folks, pony up. Reach into you're Americans. You've got the cash, all right, to help out the One Earth Film Festival and to expand your horizons, to learn about countries outside of your own. And this is one way to do that. I urge you to watch The Ants and the Grasshopper and these other films. Be part of the One Earth. Oh, and I haven't mentioned the theme this year is Turn the Tide.
Let's turn the tide.
Let's turn, well, here it just says Turn the
Yeah.
Tide. And that is what we have to do if we're going to survive. And I think it's a double message. It's also somehow about the pandemic. We need to turn the tide on that if we can. Stop being selfish. Get vaccinated. Think about the rest of the planet, not just yourself. And we need to turn the tide on climate change as well. So anyway, you don't need to hear me talk. We want to hear Raj talk some more. And so we're definitely going to invite you back.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much.
much.
And have a wonderful day. Good luck with the projects coming up. Oh, and by the way, I invite people to go to Raj's website. It is Raj Patel, RajPatel.org. It's linked to my blog post, so you'll have all of the information there. You can see what he's up to. And we'll talk again, I hope, soon.